So as Megan mentioned, I'm going to talk about the Wildland Fire Decision Support System and land fire and how those things fit together here. So the first most important thing I think I need to talk about before we get into the weeds of how WFDS and land fire work together is to just mention the risk-informed decision process, which is kind of at the heart of the Wildland Fire Decision Support System. Um, it's also at the heart of IFTDIS, and it's the main part of what we do is support the use of the risk-informed decision process. WFDIS is just the application that we use to do that. So on the bottom, this is an old graphic from WFDS Classic, and on the bottom there you'll see WFDS alignment with the deliberative risk analysis or risk-informed decision process, um, and how you step through that process and then reevaluate and go through it again. So it's a very iterative kind of ongoing process. So I did want to do a quick little bit of history because WFDS and land fire have been so intertwined for basically the whole time they've been around. In 2005, WFDS was chartered to consolidate and replace the WFSA and the WFIP, which is the Wildfire Situation Assessment and the Wildland Fire Implementation Process. And so at that point in time, we had basically two kinds of fire. You had wildfire and you had wildland fire that could then be used for resource benefit. And the main difference was um, the cause of the fire, whether it was lightning or human caused, and then where it was and what your land and resource management plan allowed you to do. So WFDS was chartered to replace those two processes with one, and to put it online so that you would have one single place everybody could go to do this work. Um, and also so that uh, we could collaborate. And at the same time, Landfire's initial mapping efforts were starting to wrap up. And so we were starting to get landscape data for fire behavior analyses. So in 2006, Landfire data made it possible to model fire behavior beyond our unit boundaries, which I know it seems crazy now, but um, being down on the Gila at that point in time, all I had really for a landscape file to run fire behavior analyses was a CD that Mark Finney had produced in 2000 that had some landscape files on it. And if I wanted to edit that landscape or do anything with it, I had to go through a bunch of GIS shenanigans to get that to work. So this was a big deal. And then in 2007, WFDS went live. And at first, all WFDS had in it was FSPro. And for those of you that don't know, FSPro stands for Fire Spread Probability. And RAVAR was another little GIS process that kind of sat on top of that. And that stands for Rapid Assessment Values at Risk. So we would take all these GIS layers that were on the landscape and we would query by the FSPro outputs to tell you what the probability was of those values being impacted by fire. And FSPro is a really powerful model. It runs basically a ton of minimum travel time models and then stacks them on top of each other. And it builds all these artificial seasons in order to do that based on your ERC and your wind data. In order to run, and one of the reasons we had to have WFDS to do it is it would have blown up a Forest Service computer at the time. It had to run on a server, and luckily we had the first outputs from LANDFIRE so that we could do this on fairly large landscapes. Because when you're running this for 14 days of growth with somewhere between 500 and 5,000 artificial seasons, some of these rare events, which is this pink you see here, they can get way out there. And so FSPro needed a server to run on, and we needed large landscapes, and we needed weather and wind data sets, which at the time we were getting from WIMS. So 2007 went pretty well for running FSPro, and the project continued on, and then they started incorporating the decision elements. So the minimum viable product was some fire behavior with FSPro and a decision support product with Ravar. And then we started moving into replacing objectives, requirements, all those kind of things. I circled a couple things in here in red. Those are the main parts that LANDFIRE helps us inform in our decision. Um, really important parts. The underlying part of your decision, which is that situation assessment on what is out there, what's potentially going to happen, so that we can decide what we're going to do about it. Also in 2008, the WFM RD&A formed to support primarily WFDSS, both in running fire behavior models, but also to assist units in doing those decisions. In 2009, the decision module was finally done. And so we started publishing decisions. So this is the official replacement of the WFSA and WFIP. And you were able to put things into your course of action and your objectives based on some fire behavior outputs from FSPro. And then that same year, this became the system of record for BIA, BLM, Fish and Wildlife, Park Service, and Forest Service decisions on wildfires. And it was mandatory, like you had to do that. That was a big turning point. And the following year, we added 3 more fire behavior models in here. So we're starting to build out the decision support now. And these fire behavior models are also really dependent on LANDFIRE. Like I mentioned before, we had LANDFIRE. It was really difficult to run the fire behavior models. Not so much because the fire behavior models themselves required specialized knowledge, and they did, but you had to have a skill set working with geospatial data because you were responsible for building your own landscape file. So LANDFIRE really lowered the bar for entry into analysis positions and helped us really broaden the use of those in wildfire beyond just wildfire use fires and kind of socialized fire behavior analyses. It's very common these days to see fire behavior analyses on any fire you go to. In that year, we also included relative risk and an organ assessment. Those have now been replaced by the PMS 236 in a single doc. And then in 2011 to 2017, we went into what's called basically just DME, Development, Modernization, and Enhancement. And so we improved the decision, we improved the models, and we kept adding data. From 2015 to 2017, we had some problems with the application. The infrastructure was aging, we had switched contractors, and we were starting to feel the age of the application a little bit. And in 2019, we took our first steps toward NextGen. And at the same time, very similar to the first time WFDSS launched, we looked at the bigger picture and what had to be in place to do what we wanted to do with WFDSS NextGen. And so services were at the core of that. And LANDFIRE came into this. LFPS and the green octopus in my Mitch Burgard graphic here played a big role in that. So if you're going to run your fire behavior models via service in the fire modeling service framework, you still need the weather and you still need landscapes. And those were 2 critical pieces, and LANDFIRE supplied the landscapes via service. So all these wheels started turning at the same time in 2019, and in 2020, WFDSS NextGen project kicked off, focusing primarily on a service-oriented architecture that we could use and then push back out services. In 2023, we went live for beta testing, and then in March of this year, we went live. Again, we only have the FSPro model. It is by far the most complicated model, and it was prioritized um, for our launch for our minimum viable product because it doesn't exist anywhere else. You can't run it on a desktop still. Um, you can run it in command line on a small server, but it is very complicated to run. The input file is quite a bear. And so we have the decision, and this time we were able to include relative risk and organizational needs assessment. So LANDFIRE, why is LANDFIRE important to all this process? LANDFIRE is really important because it gives us that wall-to-wall look beyond our agency boundaries where an incident may occur. With the size of wildfires over the past 2 decades getting larger and larger and larger, the amount of agencies and cooperators that need to participate in the management of those fires, you have to have a product like LANDFIRE that can take you beyond your unit boundaries. Also advantageous is we can scale it, so we can adjust the resolution of the product and run very large landscape scale analyses like FSPro or FSIM to support things like the quantitative risk assessment that was talked about last week. Or we can scale it way down to, a 30-meter resolution and calibrate the landscape and use it on more of a project level. So it's really good for fire management because of its scalability. And as I mentioned before, the accessibility of it is really key because when these incidents kick off, you need to respond quickly. And in order to respond, those agency administrators and the tactical resources need information very quickly. And so to have that LANDFIRE data on hand and be able to run those analyses is critical. And then it's updated quite frequently with disturbances like fire and hurricanes and landslides. And so you're getting the best that we can do. And it's also calibrated in regional workshops, which is great. So WFDSS Classic used LANDFIRE a little bit differently than we're using it in WFDSS NextGen. And I alluded to this a little bit earlier on with the services part, but the way we were first using LANDFIRE is we had to either get the CDs or a station wagon data transfer, and then we needed to put those on our physical servers, and we needed to update those yearly. And then inside the application, it just appeared like all the data was there. We were running services inside our servers and our operating system to get that data to run fire behavior analyses. This, I believe, might be one of the first ones. Oh, this is Moss Mountain. So this was run a couple years ago in the Pacific Northwest. And you can see the LANDFIRE 40 fuels there in the background. This was a heavily calibrated landscape that I used to support some fires in the Pacific Northwest. And then the other part that Classic did was we had an integrated calculator that would allow you to edit these landscapes. So when you hear me say calibration, that's what I'm talking about, is editing that fuel model layer or one of the other 8 parts of a landscape file that we use to run fire behavior models. So WFDSS NextGen uses LANDFIRE data a little bit differently. We consume LANDFIRE data in two ways. We have a reference layer that we pull up from the LANDFIRE production service. And so that displays basically like that first slide, the whole country. So we have CONUS and Alaska and the Hawaii data sets, and we merge those in the background. So it just looks like one contiguous layer. And then we also consume LANDFIRE data through the landscape service, um, through LANDFIRE production service. And that we consume that by drawing a landscape extent, sending that extent and any calibrations we want to make to the service and getting a landscape back in a GeoTIFF format. So it's primarily service-based now, and there are a lot of advantages to that. Um, the primary advantage is it's always up to date. We're never a version behind. We're just using the most recent authoritative LANDFIRE data. Again, it's still accessible, but services do go down. So that is one con of working with services is that we are not necessarily in control of that. But knock on wood, we haven't had any problems to date. Um, and then, of course, the editability LANDFIRE production service now does the calculating for us. We just have to give them the calculations that we want done. So the calculator landscape editor is built into our UI, and then it's maintained by us. We have to make sure we send those instructions to LANDFIRE in the format they want it in, and we just send that with our landscape extent. I've been talking about these points as we've been going through the whole uh, presentation here, but another big one that we haven't talked about is standardized data sets. And pre-LANDFIRE, people could use whatever workflow they wanted to. The landscape file was still standardized, but how you reached that landscape file was different everywhere you went. And so it made it very difficult to know the quality and consistency of the product, which then affects your output of your fire behavior models. So LANDFIRE is also really important because it gives us a solid data set with good documentation about how that was created. And then we know the assumptions and limitations of that data, which is critical when you're giving people decision support outputs based on that data. And then, of course, readily accessible. And we're able to share and use that data beyond our unit boundaries. Another big one, and this has been expanding over the past couple of years, is we are starting to see work going across international borders. So we have a nice buffer with Canada and Mexico. So when we share those fires across the border, we can utilize some of the decision support tools in WFDSS. And there are efforts in the background to build those out even more so that we could have products that would support North American decision support. And then, of course, another huge advantage is that the private sector and stakeholders get to benefit from these products as well. And so when they build their community wildfire protection plans or their community risk assessments, it's built on the same data that we're familiar with. We all know the assumptions and limitations of the data, and we just have to talk about the workflow of decision support products on top of that data. So, in conclusion, WFDSS could really not exist without LANDFIRE. They complement each other and probably always will. They just couldn't exist without each other. And we can talk a little bit, or I can do a demo of the system if anybody's interested. But with that, I will open it up to questions about WFDSS and how we use LANDFIRE.
I'm curious, do you need a government login to be able to use WFDS?
So you don't necessarily need a government logon. If you were to go to this URL here, wfdis.firenet.gov,
Okay,
it'll navigate you through FAMAuth, which is how you have to actually log into IFTDIS. So FAMAuth is the standardized way that you authenticate. Um, to get into the production system, you do have to have a sponsor if you're non-federal, and those sponsors are called geographic area editors.
okay,
So when you request system access, those geographic area editors will get that request and then they can grant you access. And we do have two environments. We have a production environment and we have a training environment. So the training environment is a lot looser. The production environment access is pretty tightly controlled.
okay. Thank you.
Hmm.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, Sam, we've met. You remember me? I was at the
Yep.
Colorado State Forest Service,
Yeah, I
so
remember you, Boyd.
fun to see you. So, on the next gen, well, let me go back to the classic. When we were identifying a landscape, we were able to select from multiple versions of LANDFIRE. And as a
Hmm.
modeler, it's nice to have options and just to see what the different perspectives were, I guess, on different fuels. Is that going to be the case for next gen?
Yes, that is the case. So WFDSS NextGen we're constrained by what's provided in the Landfire Production Service, of course, but they provide us with several different landscapes. So it'll default to the current year, and then we'll have the previous years that Landfire will support, and we'll also have some specialty layers like the ModFIS layers that Landfire provides. So if you're working in the Southwest or someplace that ModFIS has been built out for, and that it would apply to, right, you could use those layers as well.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Thanks. I do have another question, if that's all right.
Shoot. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so FSPro question.
Hmm.
I'm familiar with that product, and it's a good one. I'm just thinking back to years like 2020 when it seemed like uh, more fires than other years got out to that pink outer band of the
Hmm.
FSPro, and I'm just still kind of trying to. Uh, just grapple with that. And just, we know that was a more potent year in terms of how fires would move. But you got any insights on interpreting an FSPro run given that kind of a fire year setting?
Sure. The way I think about that and the way I explain it to line officers is so in a year like 2020, this pink band represents, for those that don't know, a 1 in 500 um, probability of occurrence. So we don't know how that pink cell burned, whether it was with a head fire, backing fire, spotted out there. We can't tell that. But what we do know is that one time out of every 500 fires, it burned. Um, and the way I think about it is in percentiles, Boyd. So, if you're at the 99th or 97th percentile of your weather observations and your ERCs are in that 97th percentile bin, I would definitely be looking out in these darker blues and pinks because what you know from your weather is that you are in that lower percentile bin, right? Like, whoa, we only see this, 3% of the time. Uh, if you're seeing 3% weather, I'd be looking at probabilities out into that zone, right? Um, and if you've got backdoor cold fronts or other weird, uh, non-frequent weather occurrences that might line up with that 97th percentile weather, yeah, then I'd definitely be looking out in the pinks and the blues. If it's an average spring and your weather's in the 80th percentile, I'm probably looking in here in the red. If I've got a backdoor cold front or something, maybe I look out in the orange or the yellow. But I always go to those percentiles when looking at the probability bin.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's helpful, Sam. That's a really great perspective. And for what it's worth, I would like to see the demo, but I'll stop
Oh,
there and let somebody else go.
yeah. And if we don't get to that today, we do those all the time. And I guess I will take this opportunity to make a plug for our office hours, which are actually today
Oh,
at 1300. I think it's at 13 or 14. I forget. Because we have spatial fire planning office hours today. That is at 1400. And we have the WFDS office hours at 1300. And so if you need to get to those, you could use that URL to get to the WFDS homepage. And then you can get signed up on our constant contact and newsletter that goes out, and the links for those office hours are there. And the past few weeks, we've been doing pretty much open office hours. So any questions, any demos anybody wants, we walk through that. Sarah Sinewick has arranged a list of topics we also go through. And I believe today might be fire behavior. So if you're really looking for a demo, you can hop on those office hours.
okay. Very good. Great. Thank you.
Sam, this is Jim. I'd also be interested in a demo. I'm not a WFDS user, so something brief if there's time and there's not questions. But I'm
Sure.
also interested in sort of the typical, what I call use case for WFDS and how maybe NextGen has addressed the typical use case. When does somebody log on to do what? And how have you improved their experience through NextGen?
Oh, it's almost like I prepped you for that. I didn't. But I did prepare some slides for you guys just in case something like that came up. So the typical use case for WFDS has changed over the years. Like I said early on in the talk, WFDS replaced two processes. One that was primarily a suppression process and one that was more geared toward wildfire use. We don't have those differentiations anymore. Now there's just wildland fire, and sometimes we manage for resource benefits and sometimes we don't. It depends what your land and resource management plan allows. And it also depends, um, on the severity of the conditions. So just because the land and resource management plan allows it doesn't necessarily make it a good idea all the time. So we had got into a space after, 20 years of using WFDS where we started to just use these on large type 1 and type 2 incidents. So it's primarily for extended attack teams. Forests like the Bitterroot, or I should say not just forests, but wilderness areas, places that had more permissive land and resource management plans tended to use WFDS more frequently. Um, Other places, it was just used almost as a documentation tool, not really as a decision support tool. So WFDS NextGen, we really wanted to get back to the roots of what John Simoniak and Tom Zimmerman were trying to do with WFDS. And that was to actually support your decision with analytics, right? Land fire data, fire behavior analyses, tons of other GIS data, roads, trails, values. And the fact of the matter is, we make decisions on wildfires on every wildfire. There's no wildfire that we don't make a decision on. It's just sometimes we're not using the decision support system to do that. And part of that is that the interface got clunky on WFDS over the years. So some of the main things we were looking to do with NextGen was to change that use case a bit and allow this system to be more scalable for decision support. And with the rapidity that we're getting information now from the services and the authoritative nature of that data, allows us to use the system for even small fires. So we really worked hard to make this scalable. Um, it's very map focused. The first WFDS was map focused as well, but in NextGen, you never leave the map. From searching for incidents all the way through the entire management of your incident, you don't leave the map. So you can expand the right-hand panel, you can shrink it down, but the map is the focus point because that is where we're giving you most of the data. And then we did a lot of intuitive stuff. So anybody that's been in WFDSS Classic, myself included, it's easy to get turned around because there's so many menus and some stuff is buried and some stuff is repeated 2, 3, 4 times. So what we tried to do with NextGen is to simplify menus. There's, you know, a very simple way to do it, and you can jump around, make it as complicated as you want, but there's only one place to do that. So it's harder to get turned around. And we're doing a lot of auto-generated products as well. So one of the advantages of using services is we can set up our own services. So when you start a decision, one thing we're doing is we're auto-generating planning areas, and then we're using that information to effectively do what WFDSS Classic was doing with a RAVAR when it launched. So we do a rapid assessment values at risk without the FSPro right now. And we do it as soon as you press that button. You don't have to request it. It just goes right into the system. So it's in spatial inventory. And the nice thing is that gives us the ability to give you auto-generated products, some of which are derived from LANDFIRE data, like suppression difficulty index and potential control locations. Other products are snag hazard distribution and ground evacuation layers. So we're able to get a bunch of information in front of an AA or agency administrator or line officer really quickly. So that's really where we've put a lot of our focus is getting information to that decision maker as quickly as possible, with as little human intervention as possible. So as we start moving forward, we're going to be looking at doing some automated analyses as well, so that use case can go from just the type 1 and type 2 fires all the way down to those type 5 fires. You can put that fire out, should you? You can let that fire burn per your land and resource management plan or manage it in a big box, should you? What are the potential repercussions? And give people as much information as they can get right at the front. I think I answered your question, but if there's any
Yeah, that was a great
lingering
answer, Sam. I
stuff.
really appreciate it.
Okay,
Hey Sam, I'm gonna pop in for a second. I'm gonna
Sure.
launch a quick poll, so feel free to
Sure.
take it and then minimize it. But if you would like Sam to do that tutorial, we still have 20 minutes. Maybe just give a thumbs up, a reaction, and I'll just kind of take the temperature here, or we can keep asking questions. Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up. I'm seeing thumbs up. I don't know. What do you think? Corey, did you have a question? Or
I do. I think it's a quick one. I also think the demo is a great idea.
okay,
So
let's
it
do
sounds like
that
there's
then.
some. First, I just want to say, Sam, thank you so much. Great presentation. I really appreciated your sense of history. We take these things for granted now, but it's just not that long ago that this was actually really, really difficult. So thanks for that. My question is, in your experience, when you are editing your landscape file, do you have some kind of go-to things in your mind that you're like, I usually have to make this edit in this system, or I want to check this because I frequently have to edit it. So just wondering about your common edits to the landscape file.
I guess it depends, right? It depends on the questions I'm being asked. Most frequently, I'm being asked about when is the fire going to get here? What's the potential for the fire to get here? And at its heart, that's a question about rate of spread, right? Um, and so it depends what I'm calibrating for. Am I calibrating for flame length? Am I calibrating for rate of spread? I mean, I think it's also really important to remember all these fuel models come from burning pine needles and Excelsior in a wind tunnel in Missoula, Montana. So, I mean, don't get wrapped up in the types, right? Oh, this one is a timber litter. I can't use that one. Even though my rate of spread looks to line up really well with it, it's a timber litter, and this isn't timber litter, it's grass. And it's like, well, these are all just wags. So it depends what you're calibrating for, and it depends what kind of year it is. I mean, I tend to go to the lower timber litters to put the brakes on things. I use Joe Scott's Excel spreadsheet fuel model comparison tool all the time. Um, and usually I default to doing no calibrations just to see what happens with the fire. The second or third thing that I look at. The first thing I look at is weather, and to make sure that that's reflective of what's actually happening on the fire. The second thing I look at is what crown fire method am I using? Am I using Finney or Scott and Reinhardt? And then I start looking at the landscape. So I know that's not totally what you were looking for, but I really don't have a prescription. I tend to look at what others have done on the fire. And to that end, and getting some of this evaluation back to LANDFIRE, we did add something in WFDS this time around, and it's an analysis status of calibration. So those calibrations used to be really hard to get to because you didn't necessarily know what was a calibration unless you went digging through somebody's notes. But now once you find a good calibration, you can flag that as a calibration status in your decision. It won't go into the decision, but we also won't delete it in the cleanup utility. And as we start building out our reporting, the plan is to gather up those calibrations for the year, and at the end of the year, send those over to LANDFIRE with the LANDFIRE landscape extents that they were associated with and the data source, so that they can say, I think what you're getting at, right? Which is like, hey, in this veg type or this ecosystem type or at this elevation, people are constantly changing this to this. Should we look at modifying the rule?
Yeah, great. I'm glad to hear that there's that feedback loop. So that's wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So WFDSS NextGen. So I kind of jumped ahead, and it'll take a little bit to load, but when you first come into the application, you have these 5 tabs you're only going to have 4 tabs. You won't have a support dashboard, but by default, when you get in the system, you land on the incidents page, and it's zoomed out as at a national scale. And the list of incidents that are fed in here all come from Irwin. So you don't create incidents in WFDSS NextGen. You create them from Irwin incidents. So in order to see an incident in here, it has to have had a Irwin record, which means it had to have been a start from the computer-aided dispatch. If you don't see the fire you want to start a decision from in here, that's not a WFDSS problem, that's a CAD problem. So you got to go talk to CAD. When you first start a decision in here, what's going to happen? Let me turn off some of these layers and calm down the map a little bit. So when you first come in here, you're going to see this initial planning area. and it won't be dotted, but all you'll see is this purple box. And that's important because that's what we use to clip out your land and resource management plan or your spatial fire planning shapes. And then, of course, you can draw a new one. When you do draw that new planning area, let me get rid of some of these. When you do draw that new planning area, you'll see the dotted line. So this one is the current. Not quite sure why it's not redrawing. Could be my speed here. And important also to notice, I'm using the testing system. This is not the system you guys will get in. That would be EDU. It'll be under my training applications. In fact, let me just step back and show you that. So these are up on top here because I've starred them. But for IFTDIS and WFDSS, where they sit usually is down here in the training. So the only one you really need to request access to is WFDSS NextGen EDU. And that gen will be going away and it'll just be WFDSS. And WFDSS Classic is set to be archived in the very near future. May 19th will be when training gets shut off. So if you have something in WFDSS Classic or WFDSS Classic training that you want to recover, I would suggest going to get that. If you have records in there that were part of a wildfire, so you had completed analyses or a published decision, those things will be getting moved over to WFDSS NextGen. So when you first come in here, you get this planning area, and then what we're doing is we're clipping your spatial fire planning, which for this incident, this is the Horton fire in Arizona from earlier this year. And what they did here is they wanted to keep their fire inside one of their pods, but we clip all their information so that they can then pick what they want to use for a strategic assessment. And in WFDSS NextGen, strategic assessments are basically just objectives and requirements. We call them strategic assessments because we allow you to categorize them beyond just an objective or requirement. They could be a resource concern or some suppression repair, or could just be a safety concern. Maybe there's a snag patch or something there. But if you go to the feature layer, you'll have your planning area, and then a bunch of this information comes from the Spatial Fire Planning Service, namely the multi-unit, overlapping shapes, non-overlapping shapes, and the other unit shapes. And so we take that service, we clip it, and we also bring in pods. And I'm going to turn off everything except for pods, actually, just to kind of clean up the map a little bit. And then that purple shape that just disappeared, those are shapes you can draw. So maybe you didn't capture everything that you wanted to preseason. And so you need to draw something in. You can do that with the unit created shapes. And it doesn't look like there's any pods in here, which doesn't quite seem right because I know there is a pod in here, but maybe that service is down. Let's turn on subunit non-overlapping shapes. So these would have been your what you would call your strategic objective shapes. So let's see, my internet is slowing down substantially, kind of frozen here. Yeah, that layers down. So if you're dialing things up, and this is one of the weaknesses of services, if you're dialing things up and they're not coming on, you have a service problem. So let's switch over to non-overlapping shapes. Subunit, non-overlapping shapes. And then let me turn that on over here. Well, a couple of our layers aren't cooperating, but basically you can pick any of these shapes. You can associate it with an objective or requirement, and then you include it in the decision. And one thing we've expanded on is that you can also make things a critical value risk. So for those of you not in the Forest Service, this is part of a process called ISAP, which is Interagency or Incident Strategic Alignment Process, ISAP. And what it allows us to do is classify values at risk in here. So probability of impact from your FSPro. So you might turn your FSPros. This is a manual, basically, rapid assessment values at risk. We allow you to do your course of action the same way. So you can do multiple strategies within this planning area. And then, of course, you can also do analyses. And I was back on for you. Is there anything in particular folks wanted to see inside WFDSS? Because I know we're short on time. I don't have time to step through the whole thing, but I could show you a thing or two if there's a specific request.
Go ahead, Inga.
Hi, I was just wondering what it looks like for the user when they're editing their landscape. Maybe
Oh,
that
sure.
is that an easy thing?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is where we query LANDFIRE data. So this is the calculator here. So you pick an attribute. So if you wanted to add a row, let's say we were going to do a fuel model change. And we were going to say, okay, wherever there's a 101 here, I want you to set it to maybe a 182. I want to slow it way down. And then you can apply that to a mask, so something smaller than the landscape extent. Or if you don't specify a mask, you just add it to the rules.
It
That's
just
what
does
the rule
it for
set
the
ends up
whole
looking like.
area.
Mm-hmm.
What going back to that drop down for the things that you can edit, would
Sure.
that just any
So this one is
of
where these
the
conditions exist.
okay. Yeah.
And these are all the different components of a landscape file.
Basically, like any of the landscape files, you can change things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We are thinking about adding a couple things. I know LANDFIRE offers existing vegetation as part of this, and we were looking at potentially doing some changes based on that as well. So that might be a request coming your way, Megan. I know that's been a request from Alaska for a long time. They want to be able to change black spruce just full stop. They don't want to draw it. They just, if it's black spruce, they want to change it.
Great. Thanks for letting me know
Thank
that. I
you.
saw Lisa was on the call here. So Lisa, I think you're in
Mhm.
Alaska, so get in touch with us if that's something we can be helpful with.
Yeah, thank you. I thought that that was actually kind of a done deal that it would have the EVT layer at least viewable.
It is viewable, Lisa, but it's not in the calculator. We're working on getting it in the calculator as well.
Ah, gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, it would be helpful.
We still have a couple minutes left if anybody else would like to query something with Sam on this interface.
Well, and per Boyd's earlier question, here's the layers that are currently available. So you have the 2023, 2022, 20, the 16 remap, and the 24 modfis.
Anyone else?
Hey, I'll ask one. Sam, Henry here.
Hey, Henry.
Since you mentioned ModFIS, which is just basically seasonal fuels, what do you expect or anticipate relative to folks' use of those data, given that that's now kind of part integrated with everything there? I know that there's been some confusion around what is this ModFIS-y thing, because it doesn't really roll off your tongue that well. So I'm just curious what your thoughts on that might be.
I think if you don't know what ModFIS is, you shouldn't use it. And we have had a couple problems that we might actually get back with you, Henry, on requests from LANDFIRE, because we need to build in a script that'll tell you where that data is, because I know it's limited geographic availability. And some people have just been curious about it, to your point, right? And they just want to run a landscape with ModFIS and just see what it's about. And then it turns out there's no data in their extent. And the no data is coming back as a 0. And FMSF will immediately fail the analysis.
Yep.
And so if we've got a no data inside our landscape, I think our request is going to be that we just fail the landscape creation, and we just send back an error and say, hey, you had areas of no data inside that extent, no dice. Try again.
That makes sense. Follow on then with that, because again, I think the conversation earlier with Corey and what Randy was putting in the chat, it'll be helpful to get where some editing is occurring, recognizing that we got to be careful about, fully applying said edits within LANDFIRE, because sometimes it's a unique situation that, some analyst is trying to capture based on fire behavior. So
yeah,
we will have to, assess that for sure. But I guess I'm curious with these same thing with ModFIS, will that seasonal fuels stuff, will that also show any edits that occur with that data set?
Yeah, so the statusing occurs over here on the status page. It's set by, like, this one's set by the system. This is just assigned status, but it would be a user assigned status, Henry. So it's irrespective of the LANDFIRE data source.
Okay,
it's really a status for the analysis. And then once we get reporting set up, what we'll do is we'll query through the database, find everything that was flagged calibration, and we'll pull the note, the status note for you guys. We'll pull the data source, we'll pull the extent, and we'll pull the edits. And we'll kind of pack it all up, and then you guys can break it down however you want.
That makes sense. Thanks so much, Sam. Solid work. Really nice to see how things have come together.
Yeah, well, that's the dream. We'll see when we can get that done.
Well, I just mean solid work as a whole. When we look at what's happening today, both with our data and our technology, is pretty amazing when you think about what you can do in WFDSS, what you can do in IFTDIS, how the Fire Model Services Framework connects and ties all these things together. So it's just pretty amazing how we're really helping the user community, I think, be more effective and efficient with their time. So super exciting times.
Yeah, we've come a long way from Farsight crashing on my Forest Service computer.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks,
Ryan.
Henry.
Yeah, Ryan, we're at the top of the hour, but if we can still do it, let's just try and be quick with our question.
Hey, Sam. Yeah, my name's Ryan McClyman, and Sarah Harrison and I are making the LANDFIRE fuel assignments. I'm a SOPL and LTN and FBN. I just mostly wanted to say I've looked at NextGen a lot, and I just want to share my gratitude for what a good job you guys did. It's really awesome. It's pretty amazing what you guys were able to do. The viewer and the way all the data is available in there is pretty awesome. So I just mostly want to say thanks, and we'll probably be in touch with you later on. But just want to give you like a lot of props for how awesome NextGen turned out. I've been really impressed with it. So thanks for all your work.
Thanks, Ryan.